Prison gangs exposed. The hidden power controlling Rikers Island, the invisible kings of Rikers. Inside Rikers Island, it's not always the guards who run the show. Behind those steel bars, there exists a shadow government, powerful prison gangs who control what inmates eat, where they sleep, and even who lives to see another day. One guard once admitted off the record, "Sometimes we just let them run it. If we didn't, the island would burn." And on one terrifying night, a fight broke out that proved this wasn't just rumor. Blood on the floor, guards trapped in fear, and inmates screaming a single gang's name. But here's the question. How can gangs, locked behind bars, hold more power than the people guarding them? The Whisper Network. Long before the chaos exploded, small signs showed who was really in charge. Inmates whispered names in the mess hall. New arrivals were told, "Choose a side, or you won't last a week." The Bloods, the Latin Kings, the Trinitarios, these weren't just prison gangs. Inside Rikers, they acted like full governments. They handed out jobs, settled disputes, and punished anyone who broke their rules. One inmate described it like this: "If you wanted to survive, you didn't go to the guards, you went to the gang leader. The guards could lock you up, but the gang could decide if you ate, if you showered, if you made it back to your cell in one piece." It was control without ever signing a law, and everyone, guards included, felt it. But then, one night inside the infamous GMDC unit, tensions snapped. A guard opened a door too early, and rival crews came face to face. What happened next would prove to everyone that gangs weren't just inmates. They were the hidden rulers of Rikers Island. The blood on the floor. The moment that heavy metal door slammed open, silence cracked into chaos. Two rival gangs, already glaring at each other through the glass, now stood face to face. In an instant, fists flew. Shanks, homemade blades carved from toothbrushes and metal scraps, flashed under the dim lights. Screams filled the unit as bodies collided against concrete walls. Guards rushed in, but they didn't step between the gangs. They froze. Many of them knew. Getting between rival crews could cost them their lives. Instead, they pulled back and called for backup. The fight wasn't just about anger. It was about power. The Bloods wanted to remind everyone they ruled this block. The Trinitarios weren't willing to bow down. For 10 long minutes, the floor became a battlefield. When officers finally moved in with batons and pepper spray, it was too late. One inmate lay bleeding, stabbed 6 times, while another's jaw was shattered beyond recognition. That night, rumors spread faster than the sirens. Inmates whispered, "The Blood sent a message. They're the ones in charge." But here's the shocking part. The violence didn't stop with the inmates. Within hours, a guard received a threat slipped under his chair, a note that read, "You work for us now." And the question everyone on Rikers asked themselves was terrifying. If even the guards weren't safe, who really controlled the island? When guards bow down. After the bloody riot, fear spread like smoke through the prison blocks. Guards walked their rounds with nervous eyes, knowing every hallway corner could hide a gang lookout. Then came the real shock. Inmates began receiving items they were never supposed to have. Extra food trays, cigarettes, even phones. None of these could have slipped in without help. The truth hit hard. Some guards had already given in. One former officer later admitted, "If you didn't play along, you became the target. The gangs had more eyes on you than your own supervisors did. It wasn't just small favors. Gangs now decided which inmates got to work in the kitchen, who got access to phones, and even who got moved to safer dorms. For many prisoners, it felt safer to obey the gangs than to trust the people in uniform. And the whispers grew louder. Rikers isn't a jail. It's their kingdom. But the breaking point came one stormy evening. During a routine meal service, a guard refused to deliver an extra tray demanded by the Bloods. Minutes later, chaos erupted in the cafeteria. An officer was cornered by 6 inmates with sharpened shivs pressed against his chest. The message was clear. Defy the gang, and you don't walk out alive. The Cafeteria Showdown. The guard's back was pressed against the steel serving line. 6 inmates circled him like wolves, shanks glinting in their fists. One voice cut through the noise, deep, calm, commanding. "Next time we tell you to do something, you listen, or we'll take more than food." The cafeteria froze. Other inmates stayed silent, watching the spectacle, their eyes darting between the officer and the gang. For them, this wasn't just about a meal. It was a test. Who held the real power here, the correctional officer or the gang? When backup finally stormed in with shields and pepper spray, the inmates scattered, but the damage was done. The guard stumbled out shaking, his shirt ripped, his pride shattered. That night, he put in his resignation papers. Word spread through Rikers like wildfire. The Bloods broke a guard. Nobody's safe. From that day forward, officers weren't just guarding inmates, they were negotiating with them. Some agreed to smuggle contraband. Others looked the other way during beatings. For many, survival meant surrender. And yet, just when the island seemed like it couldn't sink deeper into chaos, something even worse unfolded. Weeks later, a rival gang planned a counterattack, not against the Bloods, not against other inmates, but against the very guards themselves. One stormy night, an ambush was set in motion, the ambush in the shadows. It was just after midnight when the ambush began. A small group of correctional officers walked their usual tier check, flashlights cutting through the dim glow of the block. Everything seemed normal until the lights went out. In an instant, the unit plunged into darkness. From the cells, voices erupted, echoing like a war chant. Then came the sound of metal scraping against metal, shivs being drawn from hiding spots. The Trinitarios had planned this moment for weeks. Their target wasn't rival inmates this time, it was the guards themselves. As the officers stumbled in the dark, prisoners struck. Trash cans were hurled, sharpened blades swiped through the air, and fists smashed against shields. One officer screamed as his radio was snatched from his belt. Another was dragged toward a cell door where inmates tried to pull him inside. Backup rushed in, flooding the block with tear gas. Coughs, cries, and chaos filled the air until the inmates finally retreated. But by then, the message was loud and clear. If gangs could attack guards directly, no one on Rikers was untouchable. That night, administrators held an emergency meeting. They faced a choice: crack down harder and risk all-out war, or give gangs more control just to keep the island from burning. But before they could decide, another crisis struck. A package smuggled onto the island changed everything. And this time it wasn't just shivs or cigarettes. It was something far deadlier: the package of power. Days after the ambush, rumors began swirling across Rikers. Something new had made its way inside. At first, guards thought it was just another stash of drugs or cell phones. But this time, it was different, much worse. During a surprise search, officers uncovered a package hidden in a laundry cart. Inside were not only cell phones and narcotics, but something shocking: parts of a firearm, carefully broken down into pieces. The gangs weren't just controlling food or guards anymore. They were preparing for open war. Whispers spread fast. They've got a gun. Whether or not it was true didn't matter. Fear took hold of every tier, every block, every guard. The mere possibility of a working weapon inside those walls tipped the balance of power forever. One officer admitted later, "After that day, I stopped thinking about enforcing rules. I started thinking about survival." And the gangs knew it. They flaunted their strength, holding meetings in plain sight, ordering guards to step aside, even deciding which rival inmates lived or died. But the real turning point came just days later, when an inmate in solitary screamed out that he had seen the gun himself. Hours later, alarms blared across Rikers Island. Something had gone terribly wrong. Alarms in the night. The piercing alarm echoed across Rikers Island, rattling the steel bars and jolting guards into panic. Sirens flashed red against the grim concrete walls as officers sprinted toward the solitary unit. Inside, inmates pounded on their doors, chanting the names of their gangs. Blood, 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 thundered down one corridor, while rival chants answered from another block. The prison felt like it was on the edge of civil war. The emergency was triggered by a chilling report. An inmate claimed he saw a pistol being brandished in the shadows of solitary. No officer could confirm it, but the face here was enough. For hours, guards in riot gear stormed cell after cell, ripping apart mattresses, kicking over toilets, searching for the weapon. But here's the shocking part. They found nothing. Whether the gun was ever real didn't matter. The damage was done. Rumors spread like wildfire. The gangs have a gun and the guards can't find it. That single belief was enough to tilt power even further toward the inmates. By morning, exhausted guards admitted defeat. The gangs celebrated their invisible victory, mocking officers who had torn through cells all night with nothing to show for it. And then, just when it seemed the chaos was cooling down, tragedy struck. A young inmate who had refused to join a gang was found beaten unconscious in his cell, his body marked with the letters of a gang carved into his skin, the mark of fear. When officers discovered the young inmate lying on the cold concrete, his face swollen and blood dripping from deep cuts, the unit fell into silence. On his chest, crudely carved with a razor blade, were 3 letters, the initials of a dominant gang inside Rikers. It wasn't just violence. It was a message. Join us, or this is your fate. The guards rushed him to the infirmary, but whispers had already spread through the blocks. Everyone knew. The gangs weren't hiding in the shadows anymore. They were branding their dominance right onto the skin of anyone who dared resist. That night, fear gripped every cell. Some inmates begged to be moved into protective custody. Others lined up, pledging allegiance to gangs they had once sworn to avoid. Even seasoned correctional officers admitted they had never seen morale collapse so fast. One guard later confessed, "When I saw those letters carved into that boy's chest, I realized we'd lost. Rikers didn't belong to us anymore." And just when the administration tried to crack down, locking down cell blocks, cutting visits, searching cells around the clock, the gangs retaliated in a way no one expected. During a routine transport run, an officer opened the back of a prison van to load inmates. What he saw stopped him cold. A shank taped under the seat, placed there before the van even arrived. This wasn't random violence anymore. It was strategy. The gangs weren't just running the prison. They were planning something bigger, the plot behind the van. The shank taped under the transport van seat wasn't just a random weapon. It was a clue, evidence of a bigger plan. Investigators quickly realized this blade hadn't been planted by chance. Someone knew the exact van, the exact route, and the exact moment it would be checked. That meant one thing: the gangs had inside help. The thought chilled officers to their core. If prison transport, one of the most tightly controlled operations, was compromised, what else had the gangs infiltrated? Commissary shipments, medical supplies, even guard schedules? Inside the blocks, whispers grew darker. Rumors spread that the gangs weren't just preparing for fights inside Rikers. They were laying groundwork to control the flow of contraband across New York City. The prison wasn't just their kingdom anymore. It was their headquarters. One inmate later bragged, "We don't need to escape. Why would we? Rikers is the safest place for us. We run the island from the inside." But the turning point came just days later. During a scheduled head count, guards noticed something strange. Dozens of inmates across multiple blocks refused to leave their cells. Instead, they stood silently at their doors, tapping in unison against the bars. The sound echoed like a war drum through the corridors. Tap, tap, tap. It was a show of unity, a warning. Moments later, a fight erupted on another block, perfectly timed with the protest. Guards realized the horrifying truth. The gangs weren't acting in chaos anymore. They were organized, coordinated, and ready for war. The day Rikers stood still. The sound of hundreds of fists tapping against steel bars thundered across Rikers Island. Every unit, every block, every cell joined in, creating a terrifying rhythm that shook the prison to its core. Guards stood frozen in the corridors, radios buzzing with frantic calls. Then, like a switch, the noise stopped. Silence. For a moment, it felt as if the entire island held its breath. And then, it erupted. Fights broke out across multiple housing units at the exact same time. Smoke from burning trash cans filled the air. Inmates swarmed stairwells, shouting gang slogans. Officers were overwhelmed, running from one riot to the next, with no hope of regaining control. It was the nightmare every warden fears, a coordinated uprising. In the chaos, one guard was cornered and beaten unconscious. Another had his keys ripped away. Prisoners surged toward locked gates, testing if this was the moment they could take the island for themselves. Backup units and riot squads rushed in, but even they were outnumbered. For hours, Rikers wasn't a jail. It was a battlefield. When order was finally restored near dawn, the damage was staggering. Dozens of officers injured, entire tiers reduced to rubble, and one truth became impossible to deny. The gangs weren't just a hidden power anymore. They were the power. And yet, in the middle of all this chaos, a shocking discovery was made inside the prison chapel, something that revealed just how deep the gang's control went and how impossible it might be to ever break. Secrets in the chapel. When officers swept through the prison chapel after the riots, they expected to find broken benches and graffiti. What they uncovered instead left them speechless. Behind a loose panel near the altar, investigators discovered a hidden stash. Notebooks filled with coded messages, smuggled cell phones, and ledgers recording money transfers from the outside world. The chapel, supposed to be the one place for peace, had become the gang's war room. In those ledgers, names of guards appeared alongside inmate nicknames. Some officers had been secretly paid off, while others were blackmailed into silence. The gangs weren't just running Rikers by fear. They had built a system of loyalty, money, and power that stretched beyond the walls. One investigator later admitted it wasn't a prison anymore. It was a business, and the gangs were the CEOs. The discovery shook the administration. They ordered lockdowns, suspended dozens of staff, and tried to cut off outside communication. But it was too late. The gangs had already proved they could infiltrate the one place no one suspected. And just when officials thought they had finally cornered the leaders, word spread of something even more dangerous. A plot to take down a high-ranking official inside Rikers itself. The target wasn't an inmate. It wasn't a rival gang member. It was a deputy warden. Targeting the warden, the whispers spread quickly through the tiers. The gangs weren't just punishing inmates or intimidating guards anymore. Their eyes were set on a much bigger prize, the deputy warden. According to intercepted notes from the chapel stash, a gang leader had ordered a direct hit. The plan was chillingly detailed, an ambush in the corridor during a routine inspection, with shanks hidden in mop closets and lookouts stationed at every corner. When word reached the administration, panic erupted. For the first time in years, the deputy warden canceled all unit visits. But even in his absence, the atmosphere inside Rikers grew darker. Inmates tapped against their bars at night, chanting the warden's name like a warning. One officer later said, "It felt like we weren't guarding prisoners anymore. We were trapped in their fortress, waiting for their orders." Then came the breaking point. During an afternoon head count, a group of inmates suddenly refused to lock back in. Instead, they blocked the corridor, shouting, "Bring him down! Tonight!" Guards rushed in with shields, but the riot that followed was unlike anything Rikers had seen in years. Fires were set, alarms screamed, and inmates swarmed the halls with terrifying precision. In the middle of it all, officers discovered something taped beneath a stairwell. A crude map of the prison, marked with escape routes and weak points. The gangs weren't just trying to kill a deputy warden. They were laying the groundwork for something even bigger: total control of Rikers Island. Blueprints of control. The crude prison map found under the stairwell set off alarms at the highest levels of city government. It wasn't just doodles, it was strategy. Marked in red ink were blind spots in security cameras, guard shift changes, and weak gates that hadn't been repaired in years. Someone on the inside had given them this knowledge, someone with access. The gangs weren't just reacting to Rikers, they were building a blueprint to own it. Task forces stormed the island, locking down entire units, dragging gang leaders into solitary. But even then, the power balance didn't shift. When one leader was taken away, another rose instantly to fill his spot. Rikers wasn't one man's empire, it was a machine. And that machine didn't stop running. The final straw. Weeks later, tension snapped again. Inmates staged a coordinated hunger strike, refusing meals and flooding the medical unit with sick calls. They weren't starving, they were flexing. Guards admitted they couldn't keep up. Administrators quietly gave in, restoring privileges that had been cut after the riots. The message was clear. The gangs had forced the system itself to bend. One correctional captain later confessed, "We didn't run Rikers anymore. We just worked there. The gangs were the true bosses." The hidden power exposed. In the end, the deputy warden's life was spared, not because the gangs backed down, but because they didn't need to follow through. They already had what they wanted. Every shank, every smuggled phone, every carved threat, every chant echoing down those grim hallways proved the same chilling truth. Rikers Island was no longer controlled by the Department of Correction. It was controlled by the gangs. Their power didn't come from guns or riots alone. It came from fear, loyalty, and a system too broken to fight back. The question that remains. Today, Rikers Island still stands as one of the most infamous jails in the world. Politicians promise reform, officers demand safety, and families beg for change. But behind those bars, inmates whisper the same thing they always have. This is our world. The gangs decide what happens here. And that leaves us with the question no one has truly answered. If the gangs run Rikers from the inside, then who, if anyone, is really in control?